Do you ever feel like you're listening to a symphony while everyone else only hears a single repetitive note? That the vibrant, complex tapestry of existence you perceive is, to others, just a plain, uninteresting cloth? You try to share the music, the colors, the depth, but your words seem to fall into a void, met with blank stares or, worse, a polite but dismissive nod. They call you too serious, overly analytical, or perhaps a bit of an old soul. You find yourself in conversations, adrift in a sea of pleasantries, your mind wrestling with the colossal questions of existence, the nature of suffering, the fleeting dance of joy, while those around you debate the latest fleeting trend or dissect the manufactured drama of the day. You're not trying to be difficult. You're not intentionally contrarian. It's just that the surface rarely holds your attention. You crave the abyssal depths, the uncomfortable truths, the raw, unfiltered essence of reality. And so a quiet chasm forms, not one of malice, but of sheer, unbridgeable difference in perception. You smile, you participate, you play the part, but an inner voice whispers, "You don't quite belong here, do you?" And the question inevitably gnaws. Is there something fundamentally miswired in me? Am I the anomaly? What if I told you that this profound sense of alienation, this intellectual loneliness, isn't a sign of defect, but rather a hallmark of a mind that dares to see beyond the veil? What if the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, a man who stared unflinchingly into the abyss of human existence, not only understood your plight, but considered it an almost inevitable consequence of true, penetrating intelligence? Schopenhauer believed that the capacity for deep thought, for piercing insight, doesn't lead to a life of celebrated camaraderie, but to a path of increasing solitude. Because, as he saw it, the majority of humanity isn't equipped or perhaps willing to confront the stark, often brutal truths that a keen intellect uncovers. They seek comfort, reassurance, the gentle lullaby of conformity, and you, with your unyielding gaze, threaten to wake them from that slumber. This journey we're about to embark on will delve into Schopenhauer's world, exploring why society often recoils from its most insightful minds, and why your feeling of being an outsider might just be the most potent evidence of your intellectual and spiritual depth. It often begins in the formative years, doesn't it? In the schoolyard, where social hierarchies are forged in the fires of shared laughter over simplistic jokes, or the collective thrill of a game whose rules you find arbitrary. You might have been the child staring out the window, not daydreaming in a void, but constructing entire philosophical systems, questioning the teacher's pronouncements not out of defiance, but genuine curiosity about the why behind the what. Why do people say one thing and do another? Why is politeness often a mask for indifference? Why does the pursuit of fleeting pleasures seem to consume so much human energy, only to leave an aftertaste of emptiness? These aren't the typical preoccupations of youth, and this divergence sets the stage. This isn't about academic prowess measured in grades or the ability to regurgitate facts. We're talking about an intelligence that feels the world with an almost painful intensity, that sees the intricate webs of cause and effect others miss, that questions the foundations upon which societal norms are built. It's an intelligence that recoils from hypocrisy, that finds small talk to be a bewildering expenditure of precious cognitive energy, and that struggles to just go with the flow when the current seems to be heading towards a precipice of meaninglessness. As the years unfurl, this chasm widens. You learn through painful trial and error that your unvarnished honesty can make others deeply uncomfortable, that your probing questions can dismantle the carefully constructed facades people present to the world and to themselves. So you begin to self-edit. You measure your words. You offer diluted versions of your thoughts, or sometimes you simply choose the sanctuary of silence. You become a connoisseur of the subtle art of feigning engagement, nodding at anecdotes that barely register, smiling at jokes that elicit no internal mirth. Because the alternative, to truly speak your mind, to lay bare the intricate workings of your thoughts, feels like inviting incomprehension, or worse, ridicule. And so you're mistaken for aloof, perhaps even arrogant. But the reality is often a profound weariness, a fatigue born from the constant, draining effort of translation, of trying to bridge the gap between your inner world and the external one. You're not emotionless. You're simply guarding a reservoir of feeling so profound that it would overwhelm those accustomed to paddling in the shallows. You keep your insights under lock and key, your existential quandaries unspoken, your deepest vulnerabilities shielded from a world that seems ill-equipped to handle them. Herein lies a bitter paradox. Society extols the idea of genius, of profound thought. We build monuments to long-dead philosophers and revolutionary thinkers. Yet, in the lived, day-to-day reality, the individual who embodies these qualities in their raw, untamed form is often met with suspicion, discomfort, and a subtle, pervasive form of emotional ostracization. Why this disconnect? Because authentic, uncompromising intelligence doesn't just offer novel solutions, it fundamentally challenges the status quo. It peels back the layers of collective illusion, questions the sacred cows, and exposes the often uncomfortable truth that much of what we accept as normal is merely a confluence of habit, fear, and unexamined assumptions. And this, invariably, makes people uneasy. Your inner world becomes a landscape too vast, too complex for those who prefer the neatly manicured gardens of conventional thought. You find yourself dissecting joys with the same intensity you dissect sorrows, unable to simply be without the accompanying chorus of why. The emotional toll of this is immense, a quiet, persistent ache of loneliness that can throb even in a crowded room. You yearn for a meeting of minds, a resonance that goes beyond shared pleasantries, a connection with someone who doesn't just hear your words, but grasps the symphony beneath them. But such connections are rare, precious gems in a world awash with common stones. And so, the question returns, more insistent now. Is there something inherently flawed in my design? The tragedy is that our societal structures, our educational systems, our cultural narratives, they don't equip the deeply intelligent with the tools to navigate this specific kind of existential loneliness. We are taught how to achieve, how to compete, how to conform, but how to exist when your very mode of perception sets you apart. That's a lesson rarely offered, so you adapt. You become a master of intellectual camouflage, dimming your light so as not to blind others, simplifying your language, choosing silence when your truth feels too sharp. Not out of desire, but out of a primal need for self-preservation. Because every time you've dared to be fully yourself, you've felt the sting of misunderstanding, the chill of withdrawal. Yet, beneath the surface, the weight of unspoken thoughts and unfelt connections accumulates. A quiet melancholy, a persistent hunger for meaning, and the haunting refrain, "Am I truly alone in this?" No, you are not. This silent suffering, this feeling of being an anachronism in your own time, is not an indictment of your character. It is, as Arthur Schopenhauer would argue, a testament to a mind grappling with realities that others conveniently ignore. He saw this pattern not as a personal failing, but as an almost mathematical outcome of a certain kind of intellectual and moral constitution. He didn't just empathize with your pain. In a sense, his entire philosophy was a validation of it. Arthur Schopenhauer, born in Danzig in 1788, was no stranger to the feeling of being an outsider. His relationship with his vivacious socialite mother was strained, his worldview shaped by a stark realism that often put him at odds with the prevailing optimistic philosophies of his time. He was a man who saw the world not through rose-tinted glasses, but with the unsparing clarity of a surgeon examining a diseased organ. His philosophy doesn't offer easy comforts or saccharine reassurances. Instead, it provides a brutally honest framework for understanding the human condition, particularly the suffering that seems so inextricably linked to consciousness. For Schopenhauer, the more acutely aware you are, the more intensely you experience life's inherent struggles. At the core of his metaphysical system is the concept of the will, not will in the sense of individual intention, but a blind, insatiable, irrational, metaphysical force that underpins all of reality. The will is the ceaseless striving, the endless desiring, that animates everything from the growth of a plant to the ambitions of a human being. It is, in essence, the will to live, a relentless urge that is, by its very nature, doomed to perpetual dissatisfaction. For every desire fulfilled, new ones spring forth. It's a cosmic treadmill of wanting, achieving, and wanting anew. Most of humanity, in Schopenhauer's view, is largely driven by this blind will, puppets dancing to its irrational tune. They chase wealth, status, pleasure, not because of reasoned deliberation, but because they are impelled by this fundamental unconscious force. They are caught in a relentless cycle of striving and fleeting gratification, largely oblivious to the underlying mechanics of their own suffering. But the individual of profound intellect, the deep thinker, begins to see through this charade. They start to perceive the will's machinations, the illusory nature of many of its promises. They step back, observe, and in this detachment they gain a terrifying clarity. And this is where the true isolation begins, because once you've glimpsed the puppet master, you can no longer enjoy the puppet show with the same naive abandon. You can't unsee the contradictions, the superficiality, the often desperate scramble for meaning in a world that seems, from this vantage point, to be a grand tragicomedy orchestrated by an indifferent force. The mundane conversations, the societal rituals, the collective obsessions, they all take on a different hue. You feel like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe, or perhaps, as Schopenhauer himself might have felt, like a sober person in a room full of revelers, aware of an impending dawn they blissfully ignore. He famously wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." This isn't a misanthropic dismissal of humanity, but a profound observation about the nature of intellectual integrity. The herd, as he sometimes referred to the collective, operates on consensus, on shared illusions, on the comfort of not having to think too deeply. Independent thought, by its very nature, is a solitary act. When you begin to ask the big questions about the purpose of suffering, the value of societal constructs, the nature of consciousness itself, you invariably diverge from the well-trodden path. Not because you wish to antagonize, but because your mind cannot rest on unexamined premises. And this divergence, Schopenhauer understood, is rarely met with applause. It's met with a subtle, or sometimes not so subtle, pressure to conform. Don't rock the boat. Don't be so negative. Why can't you just be happy like everyone else? The irony, of course, is that everyone else is often engaged in a frantic pursuit of happiness that, according to Schopenhauer, is largely futile because it's aimed at satisfying the insatiable will. The deeply intelligent person sees this, and their inability to participate wholeheartedly in the charade is perceived as a defect, a moroseness, rather than a clearer perception of reality. Schopenhauer didn't believe society was inherently malicious. Rather, he saw it as a complex organism driven by the will, prioritizing its own perpetuation and the comfort of its members over abstract truth. Solitude, for him, wasn't a punishment, but a refuge, a necessary condition for the kind of contemplation that leads to genuine insight. He argued that The more a man has in himself, the less he will want from other people. The intellectually rich individual finds companionship in their own thoughts, in the great works of art and philosophy, in the quiet contemplation of nature. This isn't to say such individuals don't crave connection. They do, but they crave a particular kind of connection, one based on shared understanding, intellectual honesty, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. And this, in a world largely predicated on avoiding such truths, is a rare commodity. For Schopenhauer, the suffering that comes from this intellectual alienation wasn't a sign of being broken, but of being more fully awake to the true nature of existence. His philosophy, while often labeled pessimistic, can be strangely liberating for those who have always felt out of sync. It validates their experience, assuring them that their perception of the world's absurdities and sorrows isn't a personal failing, but a consequence of a more profound engagement with reality. So, why does a society that ostensibly values progress and innovation often exhibit such a visceral aversion to the truly original, deeply analytical mind? Schopenhauer's framework gives us clues. But let's examine the psychological mechanics at play. Firstly, genuine intelligence often illuminates uncomfortable truths. When you articulate an insight that cuts through layers of social pretense or institutional dogma, you're not just presenting an idea. You're implicitly challenging the comfort zones of those around you. People build their lives, their identities, their sense of security on a bedrock of shared assumptions. To question these assumptions is to shake the very ground beneath their feet. And the natural human reaction to an earthquake is fear, not gratitude. Consider the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias where individuals with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. Such individuals lack the metacognitive capacity to recognize their own incompetence. Now, introduce into this environment someone who possesses genuine expertise and articulates complex, nuanced perspectives. To the person ensnared by the Dunning-Kruger effect, this doesn't necessarily inspire admiration or a desire to learn. Instead, it can trigger profound insecurity. The intelligent person's clarity inadvertently highlights the other's lack of it, and the ego, in its desperate bid for self-preservation, may react by dismissing, demeaning, or labeling the source of its discomfort as arrogant, know-it-all, or out of touch. It's rarely a conscious process. It's a defense mechanism. The intelligent individual isn't trying to make others feel inadequate. They are simply operating at their natural cognitive frequency. But for those whose identities are fragile or built on a pretense of competence, this can feel like an attack. Furthermore, human beings are, at their core, tribal creatures. Our evolutionary history has wired us for group cohesion. Acceptance by the tribe meant survival. Ostracization often meant death. This ancient programming still runs deep. The group, by its nature, favors conformity. It seeks a common denominator, a shared reality that binds its members. The individual who thinks too differently, who questions too radically, who sees what others cannot or will not see, becomes a potential threat to this cohesion. They are the outlier, the variable that complicates the equation. The social immune system can then kick in, attempting to neutralize or expel this foreign body. This isn't necessarily orchestrated by a shadowy cabal. It's often a series of subtle, almost imperceptible microaggressions, exclusions, and dismissals. In the workplace, the employee who consistently points out systemic flaws or challenges inefficient but entrenched practices might be labeled not a team player or difficult. In social circles, the person who eschews superficial chatter for deeper dialogue might find themselves increasingly uninvited. Online, algorithms often amplify simplistic, emotionally charged content, while nuanced, complex thought struggles for visibility. History is replete with examples. Socrates was condemned for corrupting the youth, But his true crime was exposing the intellectual bankruptcy of Athens' powerful elite through relentless questioning. Galileo faced the Inquisition not because his science was flawed, but because his heliocentric model threatened the Church's established cosmic and, by extension, terrestrial authority. Giordano Bruno, who dared to suggest an infinite universe with countless worlds, was burned at the stake. These are extreme examples, but the underlying dynamic persists in milder forms. The cost to the intelligent individual is significant. They learn to wear a mask, to engage in a form of self-censorship. Their brilliance becomes a carefully guarded secret, revealed only in safe havens, if at all. Society, in its discomfort, inadvertently fosters a culture of silent genius, where profound insights remain unspoken and transformative potential is stifled by the fear of social friction. The irony is that the very qualities society needs for genuine progress, critical thinking, intellectual honesty, the courage to challenge outdated paradigms, are the qualities it often punishes in its individual members. We want innovation, but only if it arrives neatly packaged and doesn't disrupt our comfort. We admire thinkers of the past, but we're often deeply uncomfortable with the thinkers in our present. To be truly intelligent in a world that often prioritizes conformity over clarity is to walk a tightrope. It is to be constantly navigating the tension between your authentic self and the self that is deemed socially acceptable. And this, as Schopenhauer understood, is a lonely, often thankless path. It's not just rejection, it's a form of social exile, a quiet banishment from the mainstream. Because when you see through the game, you can no longer play it with conviction. And when you stop playing, you, by definition, stop belonging in the same way. This isn't a call to cynicism, but to a clear-eyed understanding. The friction you experience isn't necessarily a reflection of your inadequacy, but rather a testament to your refusal to compromise your intellectual integrity for the sake of an easy belonging. So, faced with this landscape, what is the Schopenhauer-inspired path forward? If society is inherently resistant to the kind of depth you embody, how do you navigate this without succumbing to bitterness or despair? Schopenhauer's answer, while stark, is also profoundly empowering. Embrace solitude, not as a failure of social integration, but as a sanctuary for the intellect and a crucible for the spirit. Let's be clear, Schopenhauer isn't advocating for a hermit-like existence devoid of all human contact. Rather, he's highlighting the quality of solitude, an inner state of self-sufficiency and intellectual independence. He distinguished sharply between loneliness, the painful craving for connection that goes unmet, and solitude, the chosen state of being alone with one's own rich inner world. Intellectual superiority, he wrote, condemns a man to solitude. This isn't a lament, but an observation. The crowd, with its noise, its distractions, its demand for conformity, is rarely conducive to the deep, sustained thought required for genuine insight. The marketplace of popular opinion is often a cacophony. Truth is more often found in the quiet chambers of contemplation. What does this chosen solitude offer that the clamor of society cannot? First, freedom. Freedom from the obligation to perform, to pretend, to dilute your thoughts. Freedom to explore the furthest reaches of your mind without judgment or interruption. Freedom to be authentically, unapologetically yourself. In solitude, you are not beholden to the expectations or limitations of others. Your mind can soar. Second, clarity. Stripped of the constant barrage of external stimuli and social pressures, the signal of your own inner wisdom becomes clearer. You can discern your own thoughts from the echoes of collective opinion. You can confront your own biases, examine your own motivations, and arrive at a more honest understanding of yourself and the world. Third, creation. Great art, profound philosophy, revolutionary scientific breakthroughs. These are rarely born in committee meetings. They are often the fruit of solitary labor, of intense, focused engagement with an idea or a vision. Solitude provides the fertile ground for the seeds of genius to germinate. Schopenhauer himself lived a relatively solitary life, finding companionship in his poodle, his books, and his own relentless intellect. He wasn't feted by the establishment for much of his career, yet he produced a body of work that continues to resonate with those who find mainstream philosophies wanting. He understood that a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. If you cherish your authentic self, you must, to some extent, cherish the solitude that allows that self to breathe. This embrace of solitude isn't about retreating from the world in defeat. It's about strategically disengaging from its more superficial aspects to cultivate your inner resources. It's about recognizing that your worth is not determined by social validation, but by your own integrity, your own intellectual honesty, your own inner richness. When you no longer desperately seek the approval of the crowd, rejection loses its power to wound. You stop contorting yourself to fit into spaces where you don't truly belong. You stop shrinking your soul to make others comfortable. And paradoxically, this detachment can lead to a more authentic, albeit perhaps more selective form of connection. You begin to attract those who resonate with your true frequency, rather than those who are merely drawn to a carefully constructed persona. This is the brutal brilliance of Schopenhauer's prescription. Don't try to force society to accept your depth. Let it, if it must, misunderstand you, because that misunderstanding is often a reflection of its own limitations, not yours. Your difference is not a defect, it's a distinction. Furthermore, Schopenhauer believed that one of the highest fruits of this intellectual solitude and clarity is the development of compassion. By understanding the blind, striving will as the root of all suffering, both in ourselves and in others, we can move beyond judgment and cultivate a deep, empathetic understanding of the human condition. We see that others, too, are caught in the will's grip, often unknowingly. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it allows for a more profound, less reactive engagement with the world. Ultimately, Schopenhauer's path is one of turning inward, not to escape the world, but to understand it more deeply, and to find a measure of peace and resilience within oneself that is not dependent on external validation. It's about finding nobility not in societal acclaim, but in the steadfast pursuit of truth and the cultivation of one's own intellectual and moral character. It requires courage to walk this path, to sit with the weight of your own thoughts, to resist the siren song of easy conformity. But for those who dare, solitude ceases to be a barren wasteland and becomes a vibrant inner kingdom, a source of strength, creativity, and profound self-knowledge. If the echoes of Schopenhauer's philosophy resonate within you, if you've long felt like an observer on the periphery of a world that doesn't quite seem to grasp the depths you perceive, then know this: you are not broken. You are not too much or too little. You are, perhaps, simply more attuned to the complex, often challenging, symphony of existence. This awareness, this capacity for profound thought and feeling, comes with its burdens: loneliness, misunderstanding, a sense of alienation. But this very pain is not a sign of your deficiency. It's a signal of your depth. It's evidence that you are grappling with realities that others choose to ignore, that you are unwilling to trade your authentic perception for the comfortable illusions of the crowd. The journey of the intelligent, sensitive soul is often a movement from a bewildered, "Why don't I fit in?" to a clear-eyed, "Perhaps I was never meant to fit into that," and finally, to an empowered, "And I no longer need to." Along this path, the nature of your loneliness can transform. It can cease to be a wound inflicted by the world and become a sacred space, a mirror reflecting your own unique truth, your unshakable integrity, your vast potential. Schopenhauer's image of great minds being like eagles, building their nests on lofty solitude, isn't about arrogance. It's about the necessity of perspective. From that vantage point, free from the noise and distortions of the valley below, one can see with greater clarity, with deeper understanding. So, if society sometimes seems to reject your authentic self, let that rejection serve not as a verdict on your worth, but as a confirmation of your unique vision. You are not lost. You are perhaps simply charting a course that others are not yet ready to navigate. And whether they eventually catch up or not, you, in your intellectual and spiritual independence, will already be navigating by the stars of your own truth. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. If these ideas have stirred something within you, if you found a measure of understanding or validation here, then this space is for you. We delve into the thinkers and ideas that challenge, provoke, and ultimately illuminate. You are not alone in your quest for meaning, in your courage to think deeply. Consider subscribing for more journeys into the heart of philosophy and the human condition. Share this with anyone you feel might be walking a similar path, and I genuinely invite you to share your own experiences and insights in the comments below. This is a community for minds that dare to venture beyond the well-trodden paths. Until next time, may you find strength in your clarity and peace in your own profound company.